any one of us, no matter how successful we've been by whatever measure, is two big mistakes away from big failure. And people like you and your listeners and so on, they're very brave. They make a lot of courageous choices. Some of those don't work out. And in fact, I'm just convinced that the people who keep making courageous choices are usually going to do okay, right? But if you make two really bad choices in a row, that can sort of take you down.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It is my pleasure to have David C. Baker with us. David is an author, speaker, and advisor to entrepreneurial creatives worldwide. He's written 6 books, advised 1,000 firms, and keynoted conferences in 30 countries. His work has been discussed in dozens of international publications. The New York Times referred to him as the expert's expert. He co-hosts the most listened to podcast in the creative services field, called Two Bobs. David, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Been looking forward to this. My first thing for the day. I'm wide awake. It's appreciated the invitation. Been looking forward to being on this.
Yeah, so we know each other through Mitch Joel and his Facebook group, or writers, published authors, and called Write and Rant. It's awesome. There's such great camaraderie and collaboration in there, and you're active in there. I'm not very active. I try to stay off of Facebook, but I've seen some of your great contributions to that group, and I thought, you know what, I'm feeling nudged from above to have you on my show. So here we are.
I do more ranting than writing in that group. It's you have fellow authors in there. You kind of understand that world. But yeah, Mitch, were you in the Speak and Spill group as well at one point?
No. I met Mitch in the SEO search marketing world, I don't know, 20 years ago or something like that. Yeah. Conferences like Search Engine Strategies and Search Marketing Expo. And he was a speaker, I was a speaker. So we shared some stages and panels and things like that.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to meet you finally.
Nice to meet you. And you have a great name. My son's name is David, so awesome. All right. So let's first of all talk about what inspired you to write this book, which I love the whole premise of it. I'm holding it in my hand right now. If you're watching me on video, you see that. But if you're on audio only, you don't. Secret Tradecraft of Elite Advisors. This looks, dare I say, badass. Like it's something that some CIA agent would carry in his or her go bag.
Yeah, right.
A bug out
bag. Right. Yeah. Well, I didn't actually think about this book for the first 25 or so years of my career. It occurred to me much later, and the realization that's behind the book was a really slow build. And so part of what I've said for most of my career is you need to be tightly positioned as a firm. The world is more complex. You simply can't be an expert in everything. You have to narrow down in some way. It could be vertically or horizontally. And so that's a message that everybody's heard from me. But then where do you go from there? So after you have done that, what's the next step in your professional development, so to speak? And what kept occurring to me over and over again in sort of deeper levels of understanding, I guess, was this notion that, okay, you not only need to be focused, but the way you work with clients needs to be different as well. Because if you do your job in positioning, you still end up with competitors. In fact, if you don't have any competitors, then it's not a good positioning. It's we get excited when we're thinking about positioning choices and we say, oh, wow, like nobody is in this. I could own this. No, you could be the very first person, but that's unlikely. It's more likely that other people thought about it and it just wasn't a good positioning. So you make the right choice for positioning and you still have competitors. How do you separate yourself from those other competitors in the space? And that's where how you work with people has something to do with it. That was part of it. The other part of it, and this is smaller but still important, was how do you stay fresh and involved and push off some of the engagement that can overwhelm you as an advisor? And so there are certain things. So the whole premise of the book is that you start in certain ways and then you keep developing more unique processes. and that protects your practice of advice giving, and it enables you to keep doing what you're doing. I mean, if what you're doing is valuable, then everybody has a vested interest in you continuing to do it for quite some time. So that was the theory behind it.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any experience or exposure to Tradecraft, or did that idea just pop in your head in the middle of the night while you were having a dream or something like that?
Oh, no, except just I'm really drawn to those TV shows and movies around that, right? And then you would get this, like, I don't think I've talked about this in any other interviews, but you would get the fact that when I was thinking about titling the book, I wanted a 2 or 3 word phrase that I could own. And so Tradecraft, I couldn't own that. Secret, I couldn't own that. But Secret Tradecraft, I didn't see much out there. And so I thought, I could own Secret Tradecraft. And so that's the book went through about 30 different iterations of a title and then kind of landed on that. And there are parts of the title that make me uncomfortable in that it's a very arrogant sounding book. And I don't mean it to be that way, but I just couldn't get away from the opportunity to name it that. So that's what it is.
For me, it doesn't come off as arrogant. It comes off as exclusive. And
okay. Well, we'll buy that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll take that.
Awesome. And so what are some of the more surprising, counterintuitive, outside the box strategies that you used to promote or launch that book in particular?
Well, podcast interviews was a big part of it. I think people ought to write books for themselves primarily, and then if it can have another purpose, that's great. So for me, I write because that's the only way I can force myself to figure out what I think about something, right? But if you want the book to be a commercial success, you have to figure out how to promote it. And nowadays, and this is probably true over the last 15 years or so, publishers aren't really promoting books all that much except for the very top ones on the list. If you're responsible for promoting your own book, regardless of whether you self-publish it or use a hybrid publisher or use a traditional publisher. And so my main way of promoting the book to people that know me is through my email list. So tens of thousands of people get a free weekly email with good insight in it every week. And so I can talk about the book there. And then to reach out to other people that I wouldn't know or wouldn't know me, then podcast interviews are really the way to do it for me. I've found lots of other little ways, but none of them as efficient as that, right?
Did you have an angle or a hook that stood out for the podcast host that you were pitching? Or was there some sort of, was there something that helped you to get the really great podcast host's attention and not just get on, small or medium-sized shows?
Right. I think there is actually, and I just stumbled on it accidentally, and I think it's my background. You may not know about that, and we haven't talked about it, but my parents were medical missionaries, and so I grew up with a tribe of Mayan Indians in Guatemala. We didn't have running water, electricity, and so mentioning that at the beginning of the bio tends to pull people in where they might just say, here's just another author. It's like, I wonder if he's interesting to talk with. And then being an airplane helicopter pilot, I think helps a little bit, not nearly as much as that thing. So that's probably the little bit of the hook. It's cheating in a way because it has nothing to do with the book, but I don't know. I'll take what I can get.
Well, I could imagine you with, especially the the Secret Tradecraft book, flying in your chopper. You're coming onto like a big skyscraper on the roof, and you're being chased by bad guys, and you've got the Secret Tradecraft book, and you're running in to give a talk.
Yeah. Like, okay, how do I escape from this? Right. Yeah. Maybe I should write I'm actually trying. Like you said, I've written 6 books. Only 4 of them are really any good. Fortunately, it's the most recent ones. But I'm actually trying to write a novel, and I'm finding it incredibly difficult. I have you're an author. You've written quite a few really well-received business books. So I'm sure you know the difference. I don't know if you've tried your hand at writing a novel, but writing a business book is about research and tight organization and bullet points. And it's like, you can't do that in a novel. This needs to be a lot weirder, a lot more creative. And I'm struggling to how to do that. I'm really hoping that I can do it at some point. Have you tried to write a novel?
Not a novel, but working on a children's book series. And of course, that's fictionalized and has animals talking and doing kind of human things and learning lessons and stuff. So it is a different kind of a thing for sure.
Very different. Yeah.
Have you tried tapping into your intuition, your unseen support team for guidance?
I have, and they haven't been very helpful. I think I just have this sense that if I really let loose and write what I want, it'll be the only novel I write, and I'll be disavowed by all of my friends and family. And so I'm really cautious about getting this thing written. I'll release it right before I die, right? So I can't be around to see the mess that it creates.
Oh my goodness, that's hilarious.
The one I'm working on it's called Nashville Falling. It's about this consultant who was very, very successful and then became homeless in Nashville, which is where I live. So you can see the connection there.
Okay. What's your connection with homelessness?
I don't really have one, hopefully, and hopefully that remains that way. But
maybe after the novel's out, right?
Yeah, that's when it'll happen. But I've just philosophically, I've always felt like any one of us, no matter how successful we've been by whatever measure, is two big mistakes away from big failure. And people like you and your listeners and so on, they're very brave. They make a lot of courageous choices. Some of those don't work out. And in fact, I'm just convinced that the people who keep making courageous choices are usually going to do okay, right? But if you make two really bad choices in a row, that can sort of take you down. And I'm always amused in listening to folks who are outside that entrepreneurial practice, who admire the entrepreneurial life, but don't really understand how on the edge it is all the time, like from a money standpoint, from a mental health standpoint, from physical health standpoint. And the terror that comes, especially if you have a team that are depending on you for a paycheck, right? So anyway, I've just always felt like, let's not get too haughty about our success. Let's realize that it's a combination of discipline, a lot of discipline, some intelligence, doesn't have to be crazy intelligence, and then a whole lot of luck. And let's just recognize that all of those things wound together create what we view as successful people. And pride is a little misplaced sometimes. I mean, we can be happy with what we've done to create this, but let's recognize that there are a lot of people out there who just haven't had the same opportunities we have that would be just as successful as they had them, and not think that we're all that unique, really.
Wow, that's a interesting way to look at the world. That's really different from how I see things. I'm relying on my intuition a lot to get guidance on what to focus on. One of the things I do in my morning routine is ask God, what do I need to know or do today? And I always get answers that I will journal, and then I take very seriously, because I know that this isn't just my imagination, and so I'm not really waiting for the other shoe to drop, or thinking of a failure as or two failures in a row as like I'm eating ramen noodles and living in a box. I don't. It just. I believe in the guidance that we all get, that nothing is random, nothing is by accident. I don't even believe in luck. I don't believe in anything random. It's all divinely orchestrated is how I see things. And I can't say that I always saw it that way, because before the two awakenings I had, one in India in 2012, and then the second one in Israel in 2021. Before all that happened, I wasn't connected to my intuition, really. I wasn't connected to God, to my higher power. I was agnostic. I was just kind of going through the motions, but not really living. And yeah, it was all perfect. It was all how it was meant to be. You know, you don't connect the dots except looking backwards. So I don't know. What are your thoughts about all that?
So I grew up. So I would say my journey would be the inverse of yours, in the sense that I grew up as a missionary kid, right? Yeah. So in a very religious setting, and most of my beliefs, I have come to believe, were not deeply held. They were more inherited beliefs. And so as I started to sift through those and decide which ones were real and which ones weren't, there was always this danger that when you lift up the tarp and you see what's underneath it, that you might pitch the whole thing, right? And that was a fear, but it didn't turn out to be real. I'm plagued by two things in the universe. One is that it seems utterly ludicrous and impossible that there isn't something behind our world. It just seems like that this all happened by chance just seems like a big joke to me. There's got to be something behind it. Every day there's so much evidence of that. And that's on the one side. The other side is, well, whoever this is, why are they silent in a traditional sense? Now, they might not be silent, like speaking to you through intuition and so on, but it would be so easy to give us some very specific sign, right? Anyway, as I was going through all of that, like now I believe far fewer things than I did back then. The things that I still believe, I believe very, very deeply. Mm-hmm. And so I consider myself a very spiritual person, but not a religious person like I was before. Mm-hmm. And tying this all together with sort of my own upbringing, like I understand the psychological safety it brings to believe that everything happens for a particular reason. But to me, that's a belief that it's possibly true, but I don't know. I look at the people that I grew up with who don't have the same opportunities I do. And is there a reason I have the opportunities and they don't? I don't know. It's just, I think I like having this discussion because I think we ought to be open to learning all along. Like when I'm listening to you, what you believe is different from me, there shouldn't be any defensiveness and just listening. Like maybe you're right. Like, I've changed my mind on so many things over the years. It's like, bring it on. Let me hear this. Like, yeah.
I appreciate the open-mindedness and the candor and vulnerability that you're offering my listeners as well as me. And I'm curious to hear if there was any instance where you felt like you were connected to something bigger, to the universal, kind of infinite intelligence, the glimpsing the bigger picture, getting some sort of download or sign or something, like a without a doubt sort of sign. And just I'll preface this by saying that synchronicity is something that isn't super like woo woo. It's my understanding is it's like the scaffolding of the universe, of how the universe is meant to work. When somebody says, "Oh, that's crazy," how could that even happen? It's not crazy. It's how the universe is designed. And just an example of that happened to me within the last few weeks. I was guided to contact my father and to just reiterate my forgiveness of him from something in the past that I had already forgiven him for, but to relay another message in relation to that he needs to forgive himself. As soon as I hit the button to call him, and we don't talk that often, maybe a half dozen times a year, the second I hit the button to call him, to call his home number, a text message comes in from him, and he'll text maybe a few times a year. It was not just like within a minute or within 20 seconds. It was the exact second I hit the button. And he's very skeptical. He's not connected to the synchronicity and all that is too woo-woo for him. But that was pretty undeniable. Because as soon as he hit the text button, the send message button, the call came in from me. And that was pretty uncanny. So
yeah,
and here's another one that is pretty famous. Learned this from the Wikipedia page of the book The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. He wrote that book in 12 days. 150 million copies sold. A novel, right? Where we get the you and I get the writer's block on writing creative fiction stuff. What you were saying you do, and I certainly do. I'm struggling with the plot line for my children's book series, for the first children's book I'm working on. So to just have the spigot turn on and have the entire book kind of downloaded to him from above in 12 days, and it not to be just mediocre book, but one that's deserving of 150 million copies sold, is just astounding. I mean, you can't deny the supernaturalness of that.
Yeah. Well, that mirrors how I feel about the world, that there's got to be some supernatural here. It just seems to use the word faith, it takes a lot more faith to believe there isn't than that there is. To me, it's just so easy to fall into the idea that, like, God, there's something going on here. But to answer your question, yes, actually it occurred in a Pizza Hut, an odd place in Warsaw, Indiana, where I was kind of at the end of my rope, feeling like I didn't know what was real and what wasn't real. I was having dinner with my wife, an early dinner with Julie, and it just hit me. It's like, okay, this is what I'm designed for. I'm not headed into this field. I'm headed into this field. This is what I believe. I'm on this eternal search that starts here. I don't know how old I was, my young 20s. We didn't have any kids yet. And our first kid was born when I was 22, I think. So 21 maybe. And then oddly enough, like at another Pizza Hut many years later, I actually asked my wife to marry me because the place that I'd asked her to, that I'd made a reservation at, was closed unexpectedly. And so we had to go to next door to the Pizza Hut. I don't think those two things are related, but I always just think about those two events in my life.
Why would you think those are not related?
Well, I don't know. Maybe they are. I know that we're beings that are searching for meaning. And so we're on the lookout for any signals that there is meaning, right? And I think that's fantastic. I mean, my life ought to matter. I mean, I read somewhere, or I heard somewhere, I forget, last week, somebody said you ought to write your own obituary, and then you ought to live like it, right? And I really believe that's great advice, but I've also said, and I made a big point of this in an early book on managing people, like people in the creative field that I serve, advertising, marketing, design, digital, and so on. They're really intent on changing the world. And I just have to smile about that. It's like, your client, you're running a 50-person firm or whatever, 10 years from now, your client will remember nothing about your firm, nothing about what you did for them. They won't remember the names of anybody they worked with on the account team. But somebody who worked for you as a boss, like you manage them, 10 years from now, 20, 30 years from now, they'll remember everything about what they learned about life from you, what you did for their career, the moments you had courageous conversations with them, the moments you screwed up and did the wrong thing and either apologized or didn't. Like, if we want to impact our world, let's just start with family, friends, coworkers, and then if the rest of it happens, fine. Like, these books they're great to write. They help me clarify what I think, and I get feedback from people that they've been influential for them, and that's fantastic, right? But it doesn't really define my life. My life is more about the impact I have at a really deep level with people around me. And I don't even know why I'm off on this topic, but it's just interesting to me how we talk so much about our work lives, and we want to get famous. We want to do personal branding and all of that stuff. And that is useful. I don't hate it, but it's also a little bit artificial, right? It's just, you and I both know you've had people on your podcast that are really good people in life, and then people that are just jerks, right? And either you know it or you don't. It doesn't really matter. It's like, let's get down to real living and thinking deeply about these things. Let's not be afraid to have conversations that challenge us and so on. So anyway.
Yeah. So what if nothing was a coincidence? What if Pizza Hut was exactly where you were meant to be? And
yeah, it's possible.
What if the definition of synchronicity from Carl Jung, I'm paraphrasing it, but it's basically the inner world is syncing up with something in the outer world. Right? You think about a friend, an old friend, maybe somebody that you had a falling out with and you haven't spoken in 20 years. Suddenly, as soon as you think about them, the phone rings and it's them. Right? These sorts of things are not outlandish. Like I said, my understanding is this is how the universe is designed to work. And what if you, I, our listener, what if we are the starring actor, each of us, in our own movie, and everybody's watching, and essentially it's, you are Truman in the Truman Show, and you have a huge audience, and they're rooting for you, and they're whispering to you like, take that chance, say yes to that interview, or start this book, get it done, publish it.
Yeah.
Talk to this publisher rather than this other one. What if that is the true nature of reality instead of what we see as the three-dimensional reality of, I'm sitting at a desk. That's real. That's hard. Actually, it's mostly space if you look at it at a quantum level.
Yeah.
But it feels incredibly real. But what if all that's illusion?
Well, whether what you're saying is true or not, I think we need to live that way. I think we need to live with intention. We need to assume that what we do matters, that there's some fabric underneath this that's weaving things together. Because, humans without meaning, without intention, are just ugly, lonely people of despair. And so I want that. But you can actually live that way without knowing for certain that that's true, right? At least I wouldn't ask you to agree to that, but I do for me, that's true, right? I was not afraid to examine some of the very specific beliefs that were a part of my upbringing. That didn't terrify me because I knew that underneath all of it, there was a net. I couldn't fall so far that it would be destructive. And so I do think we ought to live that way. And what we do matters, right? What we do with neighbors matters. What I write in a book matters. Or you go to Amazon and you read a review that's not, I forget what the average review for this book is. I think it's 4.6 or something. And then you read the reviews that drag it down, and it's 1 star by somebody.
Why would you do that?
Well, I know. I just
why punish yourself?
Watching an accident, right? It's just, and then you do it. It's like, oh, why did I do that? So stupid, And then I think
that's like turning on CNN,
going on in this
News Network.
life?
Like, why would you do that?
Yeah. Why would you watch any news? Why would you read Twitter? Right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of like, I want to see accidents today. I want to, but you just think, okay, there's a story here that whatever this person's facing, there's something going on in their life, and I don't understand it, and it's okay. And you know what? Just let the water sort of roll off your back, and don't think too much about it. Or like I just closed a big conference we do every year, and I was the closing speaker. And I said to everybody, you know what? I'm not a really great speaker. I think I'm a really good writer. I'm an average advisor. I'm not a great speaker.
An average advisor. So you got people lining up after your talk saying, I want to hire you as an average advisor because you really sold me.
Yeah, right. But there's something about, I don't know, I'm compelled to be honest about this stuff. So then afterward, I get some feedback that, yeah, that wasn't really good. It's like, well, I can't take that personally. Like I'm the one that said I wasn't a great speaker.
You set the frame, your words are powerful. So yeah, you created your reality. That's funny. Well, you said something that was really profound about the net. And that reminds me of an old adage that leap and a net will appear. Mm-hmm. Which is pretty much the exact opposite of what we were saying earlier in this conversation, that we're all just 2 mistakes away from disaster. And, just don't get too high on yourself because you might just be knocked into the gutter. Now I'm paraphrasing, but that idea is so contrary to this idea of a net's always going to appear for you and that you're safe. Are you vacillating between the two, or is really your kind of your soul knows that you're safe, and your ego is just occasionally coming in to say, no, disaster's on its way. Just wait, the other shoe will drop.
Well, it's a definition of safety to me. So the way I make decisions is and I know this is very twisted. I wouldn't recommend this for many people, but I just imagine what is the absolute worst that could happen if this goes bad. And then the second thing I say is, okay, could I take that? Would I be okay if that happened? And the answer is always yes. Mm-hmm. And so, okay, go ahead. Like, being homeless it means I'm a failure commercially, but it doesn't mean I'm a failure as a person. I mean, I've had lots of conversations with homeless folks, and many of those people are really smart, really interesting, that have had a run of bad luck. And so I don't have any trouble reconciling those two thoughts at all.
Mm-hmm. Have you done much best case scenario thinking to the same degree that you make the worst case scenario thinking part of your habit?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Good. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it involves winning the lottery or speaking at something that I've always wanted to, of course, recognizing how good a speaker I am anyway, right? That has to come into play. Writing a book that really, really catches on, and isn't selling 20, 30, 40,000 copies, but selling millions of copies. Yeah. And
like your novel.
And yeah, hopefully my one and only novel that drops right before.
Oh, yeah. Come on.
We'll see.
You know the story of Napoleon Hill and how outwitting the devil sat in a vault or something with the family for decades and decades because he was too afraid and his family was too afraid of what people would think. And so it didn't start changing the world and making a difference in people's lives until, 70 or 90 years after it was written, which is a real shame.
No, I didn't know that. Haven't heard that. Yeah. Interesting. I'll have to go look that up.
So best case scenario thinking, I would suggest a much better default than worst case scenario thinking. Like what, not kind of outlandish, ridiculous stuff like I'm going to win the lottery, but more like not what if 2 big accounts cancel at the same time or within a short period of time, and I'm overly reliant on them, and then I have to start laying off staff or whatever, and then all my best people leave, and then that's the worst case scenario thinking. What if I get 2 new accounts within the next month that are bigger than my 2 biggest accounts now? What if that happens? And what if you work on feeling the feelings of that having already happened? Because that's the secret to the law of attraction. Most people don't realize this, and I didn't realize it for a long time. The law of attraction, the movie The Secret and all that, like if all you'd think about are bills, then that's what's going to show up in your mailbox. But if what you're focusing on is the checks arriving, then more checks arrive. That kind of works. But there's this important nuance that you need to believe with absolute certainty that that's happening and that it's already happened, and work on feeling the feelings of that having already happened. So you have to kind of fast forward into the future, feel what it's like to receive those checks in the mail, to win that lottery or whatever. And wow, you're so grateful. You're so blissed out and happy and just trusting and in your, I don't know, in your purpose, in your dharma. And you're just like, wow, this is an amazing. Mm-hmm. And you feel that now before the checks have arrived. You feel that now before the novel has been published.
Yeah, I think there's room for that, right? But I'm also the guy flying a helicopter that's not going to.
You're not going to daydream while you're managing all
I'm going to think about failures of different components and how to deal with that, right? But I'm not going to look forward to it. I'm not going to assume it's going to happen, but I'm going to be prepared for it. And when I write a book on financial management of a firm, I'm not going to write the book based on feeling that all this success will come. I'm going to define success for them, financial success, and help them prepare the firm so that it doesn't go away if certain things happen. Like I want to be very, very complete about the success and the failure of things, right? That's just how I think. But like from a friend or a universe or a God standpoint, I think there's a lot of brilliance in what you were saying. But I'm also practical as well. So I have to have a balance of all those things.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a real need for people who are intuitive to bring the common sense practicality of the business world into what they do, because they're charging like, I don't know, $100 a session or whatever, and they should be charging 10 times that. And vice versa, the hardcore business person isn't listening to that still small voice because they don't believe it's real or it's their higher power or their unseen support team. They just dismiss it and they think that everything that happens is just purely from their own efforts, and they're completely disconnected. I was agnostic, like I said, up until age 42. Went to India on a Tony Robbins Platinum trip. And one of the monks that Tony had brought in touched me on the head, gave me a oneness blessing. And, I was blissed out, and everything was in Technicolor, like a cartoon, like an LSD trip. I don't know what that's like, but everything was psychedelic. Never done drugs before, but I felt so deeply connected to God and to everything that is. And everything changed. Miracles started happening immediately, like one after another. I met my soulmate 2 months later. 12 hours after I fervently prayed for her to show up in my life right away. I used those words when I was praying to God, right away. 12 hours later, she's introduced to me by a mutual friend. And I knew within minutes that she was my soulmate in 10 minutes. So got a ring, proposed to her 9 days after we met. Like there's a whole story there. Anyway, so yeah, I think there's room for both. You said you're spiritual, but you're not religious. I think there's room for both. I think that it's not duality, one or the other. And I feel like that's missing for a lot of folks and a lot of companies, organizations. They're not. Maybe they say that they're heartfelt or their values are one of contribution and customer focus and giving back and paying it forward and all that, but there's no supernaturalness to it. There's no magic. It's just kind of, boots on the ground, let's get this done, rubber meets the road, whatever the analogy is. And the sacredness and the synchronicities and the magic is missing. Maybe I'm not seeing it, but it's there. I don't know. What do you think?
I think we each find our own paths, and this works for you. Obviously, it works for you, and I think it would work for other people as well. But I don't know. I would be hesitant to impose that on other people.
Yeah. Well, everybody has their own path, so yeah, it's just it's an invitation, not a requirement.
Yeah, an invitation to find something deeper in what you're doing and why you're doing it and why it matters is really, really healthy.
Yeah,
it can't just be about money. To me, money is a wonderful thing because it enables more generosity. It gives me, I exchange money for time. It allows me to think and to be thoughtful and to spend a lot of wasted time working on books or developing concepts or whatever. But it's more than just about money, right? And I also don't want to believe something that only makes sense here and wouldn't make sense with this Mayan tribe of Indians, right? So, like, to give you a very specific example, you hear a lot this phrase. It's said in many different ways, but you really need to find your purpose, love what you do, and then success will follow. It's like, yeah, that's a very first world sort of approach. I mean, of the 4-point-some billion people in the world, at least 1 billion of them don't have that available to them. They go out to the field and they work at a subsistence level to raise crops, which they use, and then they trade the excess for other things. And work is work for them. They can enjoy it. They could be a certain kind of people, but let's not sort of force our first world way of thinking on everybody. That's one thing that just kind of bothers me. I want to think about things from a universal standpoint.
Yeah. I think a universal commonality that might resonate for you, I think it's universal. I experienced this, witnessed this when I went to a Mayan village just not even a year ago. It was in Belize. It was part of a Maverick mastermind trip. And there was a cacao ceremony and so forth. And I don't know if she would be considered a shaman or medicine woman or what, but she was married to the kind of chief of that village. And I saw her picking plants or leaves and things and asking the tree or the bush or whatever that she was picking from for permission before she did it. And that just shows a level of connectedness and thoughtfulness, foresight, something that I was just really impressed by. And I think that's something that can be universally agreed upon for somebody who wants to be, more in their purpose, more connected, more receiving guidance and insights and synchronicities and so forth. And then that terminology that's so used as a derision of being a tree hugger, it's just bizarre to me. Like, don't you want to be connected to the trees and to nature and to all that is, to be one, because that's the reality, is we're all one. And yet, people use it as a knock, a tree hugger.
Yeah. I wonder, like, are we really as advanced as we think we are? There's still a lot of secrets hidden with tribal livers, right? Who it's so easy just to hand wave away whatever they're doing, when in fact maybe our version of advanced society has lost a lot of that, right? And I think if you've never been, I've always believed that you should see different parts of the world. I kind of got in trouble in an earlier book, The Business of Expertise. I said everybody needs to go to a developing country, and if they can't do that, they should go to Mississippi. That was anyway. People didn't enjoy that joke.
And then you bring it up in a podcast, so you can just
rub it in.
Get the irate people ticked off again.
Get them going again. Yeah, but we ought to send our kids to developing countries to see for themselves the different life, and not that it's some primitive life. It's a different life. And there are values that they hold, which we shouldn't have let go of, right? Around some of that. And the notion that we need everything that we have to be happy and successful, it's like, that's just bull. You're just struck by how grateful and happy these folks are. Mm-hmm. And also that they have short lifespans and a lot of untreated diseases. But like, it's just I'm just blown away. I am a U.S. citizen. I didn't come here to live until I was 18. And I love the United States. Whenever I come back, it's like, oh, it feels great to be back here. But this is not the center of the world. We don't have all the answers.
Yeah. Amazing. So what would be the thing that makes the difference for you in getting your novel done and out in the world? Like what's the difference maker? What's the insight or the transformation here that's going to get you over the hump?
I go on 4 or 5 day writing adventures where I just go by myself somewhere. And so I just got back from one. And
where'd you go?
I've taken it in Ford. I went to the Dominican Republic. There's this little hotel there I go to all the time. I've written all my books there.
Oh, wow.
And it's just, I don't know, there's something magic about it for me. I can write there. So that's where I go.
That's so cool.
Easy to get to. But I think what I need is I need the concept. I've started it 4 different times in different directions, and I haven't decided where to go with it yet. Once I know where to go, I feel like it'll just all come gushing out. And so I'm just
maybe in 12 days
sticking with it. Yeah, right. Yeah, that kind of blows me away. I can't quite imagine that. Yeah, I didn't even know about that story. I write faster than most people do, but it still feels very draining and painful. And I just can't imagine what he must have been like after he finished that. Maybe he was very happy and relieved, but I would guess he probably couldn't talk with anybody for 30 days.
That's funny. How did you find that hotel in the Dominican?
I go on photo adventures all the time by myself. I do a lot of photography, and I wanted to photograph the forts there. It's where Columbus landed first. It's the oldest church in the Western Hemisphere. And so there's a lot there to photograph. And I had just tried different hotels every time I went and landed on this one and just liked it. There's something about it. Just felt like the right shape and space and within walking distance of some good restaurants. And I could go down to the beach, this little cafe, and write. They had Wi-Fi to make it easy to do research and so on. So that's how.
Okay, cool. It was meant to be. It's probably some sort of energetic portal or vortex or something going on there too.
Right.
That's awesome. So what would be some of the kind of marketing advice to wrap up this episode? We went off on all sorts of wild tangents.
Where we didn't talk about the book at all.
Yeah. So if we were to kind of provide a wrap up of some very practical marketing and business advice from this episode, what would you say? What would you offer?
So I'd just say 2 things. It's important that you be specialized, that you have a very, very deep expertise, which means, and that's painful to do because it means that you might have opinions about lots of things, but you're not going to have a deep expertise worth a lot of money in lots of areas. So that would be the first thing. And the second thing is that how you deliver that expertise is also important. That's what Secret Tradecraft is about. So they say, my podcast partner, Blair Enns, he says all the time that the sale is the sample. So how an advisor sells you on something is an accurate preview of what it's going to be like to work with that advisor, right? And so moving away from the sale as a sample, I think that experts need to deliver their expertise in a very specific way too. And how they do that should be very intentional and different from the way other people do it. And there needs to be a focus on protecting your, I guess, sort of the bubble that you live in. I always think of if you're flying and at the beginning of every flight, they talk about how adults should stick their face masks on first before children. And taken out of context, that sounds like such a selfish thing to do. It's because just looking at it, you think, why are they doing that? They're not protecting their children first, right? There's a very specific reason you do that. And I think that advisors it's not like you're operating a machine, which I've also done in different jobs before I got here. You're using yourself, and that needs to be protected. And so part of the process needs to end up with moats around who you are as a person so that you can deliver great advice indefinitely. And there's not some certain amount of time where you've given all that you can and you can't do it anymore. So those two things, your positioning needs to be tight and the way you deliver advice needs to be very specific.
And what would be a way that you're doing it? You're eating your own dog food in what you described.
So I've gone down the path of very heavily productizing my service offerings. So there are fences around what I do and how I deliver that. A certain number of calls, a certain time on the calls, certain amount of follow-up guidance so that the workload doesn't just sort of creep into my personal life. That would be one way that I've done this, right? And then also recognizing that there are different seasons of expertise building. So in the early days, for instance, you might be invited to be on a panel, and that's probably a good place to start. But then after a certain point, you say, no, I don't do panels anymore. I'm just going to do breakouts by myself. And then at a certain point, you say, no more breakouts. I'm only going to do keynote stuff. And you could apply that to everything, like how you fly, the hotels you stay in, how you charge, what kind of groups you're a part of. And so there's just this natural recognition that all of us are on a journey and different things are appropriate at different points in that journey. So that's part of it too.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me here. I appreciate it.
One thing that just popped for me, a book that I think might be helpful for you and for our listeners, and that I'm in the course of reading right now, is called 10X is Easier Than 2X. It's by Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy. And
I know Dan Sullivan.
It requires a different way of being, of thinking, of approaching problems and opportunities. It is easier if you're willing to give up everything that's just 2X or less and clear your schedule and your to-do list of all those lower value things that are only going to get you a doubling, which seems amazing.
Right.
But that keeps you from the 10X things. So I don't know if you've read the book or you've...
I haven't read that book. I know Dan. Dan's spoken at my events before, and I've been through the Strategic Coach program up in Toronto, but I wasn't aware of that book.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. So, I just think that that novel that you're trying to write, it's time, and that's one of those 10X projects. It's not a 2X. It's not yet another regular book. Could be the definitive book for you. Could be. Mm-hmm. And then there's other 10X things that you haven't even dreamed of yet.
That's true. That's right. I appreciate that thought.
All right. Well, thank you so much, David. Thank you, listener. Take some action. We'll catch you on the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.